Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're zeroing in on something that, well, you might associate with stage magicians, maybe, or those cheesy movie plots, hypnosis.
Right.
Yeah,
Swinging pocket watches. You're getting sleepy.
exactly. But let's maybe hit pause on that image, the whole mind control idea, because what if hypnosis is actually a really natural state, like intense focus?
There's a perfect place to start because, yeah, the word hypnosis definitely conjures up those dramatic images, doesn't it? Someone else pulling the
Well,
strings.
Willie.
And that's exactly what we want to, dig into today. Our mission here is to really unpack what hypnosis is based on the sources we've got and separate the facts from, well, the fiction.
We'll be looking at it from a clinical angle, right? How therapists see it. And its history, too.
Absolutely. Clinical views, definitions, how it's used therapeutically, and yeah, a really fascinating look back at how we got here.
Okay, so just for a sec, think about this, listeners. Have you ever been so completely lost in something like a great book or a film, maybe a hobby you love, that time just seemed to disappear?
Or the world outside just fades away. You don't hear someone calling your name.
Yeah, exactly that feeling, that super focused state. It's surprisingly close to what we're talking about today with hypnosis. Okay, so let's get down to it. What is hypnosis, according to our sources?
Well, a few key ideas keep coming up. One definition talks about it as that state of really focused attention, where the things around you, the sounds, the distractions, they're mostly ignored.
Like a trance or daydreaming.
Pretty much, yeah. A trance-like state, like a deep daydream. And interestingly, it also mentions that this kind of focus shares some similarities with what goes on in our brains during REM sleep, the dreaming stage.
Ah, okay.
And then there's a really insightful view from Milton Erickson. He's a huge name in this field.
Mhm.
He really stressed that hypnosis isn't something done to you. It comes from within you.
From your own experiences.
Exactly. Your own learning, your memories, even the subconscious stuff. He called it a special state of sort of non-waking awareness, where you're really receptive to ideas. The key is the power is yours, tapping into your own learning.
So definitely not being unconscious or asleep.
No, absolutely not. The sources are very clear. It's a state of consciousness, a specific kind, yes, where you're more open to suggestions, more willing to respond to ideas, but you're aware.
And Erickson's point was it uses your own life experiences.
Right. It's not some mystical thing. It's harnessing what you already know and have learned, often without even realizing it.
That makes a lot more sense. One source also mentioned relaxation being part of it. How does that fit in?
Yeah, relaxation often helps people get there. The idea is as you relax, your brain activity kind of shifts more towards the higher thinking parts, the cortex, and less towards the basic stress response areas, like the limbic system.
So relaxing lowers the mental guardrails, so to speak, makes you more open.
Precisely. More open to new ways of thinking, new perspectives.
And our sources really hammer home that this is a natural thing, right? Something most people can do, though maybe not all to the same depth.
That's a crucial point. It's not some special skill for the easily suggestible. Most people can experience hypnosis. And to really, put that sleep idea to bed, one source mentions the Oxford Medical Dictionary.
Oh, yeah. What does it say?
Well, initially it uses the phrase sleep-like state, but then, importantly, it immediately clarifies that brain scans, EEGs, show activity like relaxed wakefulness alpha rhythms, not the slow delta waves of deep sleep.
So even a dictionary definition corrects itself with the science. That's key. It's focused awareness, not nodding off.
Exactly.
You know what really made this click for me? In the source material, that example of the rugby player David Strettle.
Oh, the one about the crowd noise?
Yeah. Saying he had blinkers on during a match, totally oblivious to like 82,000 screaming fans.
And the source actually calls that a negative auditory hallucination, which sounds dramatic,
Yeah.
but it's something they see in really deep hypnotic states. It's a perfect real-world example of how focus just shuts things out totally naturally.
Okay, so we're getting a clearer picture of what it is, but we need to talk about what it isn't, because that mind control idea is huge, right?
Absolutely. Probably the number one myth. And the sources are emphatic. Hypnosis is not mind control. You don't lose control.
You can't be made to do things against your will, like cluck like a chicken unless you secretly want to.
Pretty much. You cannot be forced to violate your core moral code.
Yeah.
Even those stage volunteers doing silly things, they're still operating within their own limits. They're usually people who are naturally more outgoing or suggestible, and crucially, they're okay with playing along.
That's actually really reassuring. I think people worry about being manipulated or spilling secrets.
It's an understandable fear given the portrayals. But you always keep your free will. Another big myth is getting stuck in trance.
Right. Can that happen?
Nope. Sources say you can always choose to come out of it. That slightly fuzzy feeling someone might get afterwards is just like refocusing after being lost in a movie, a brief readjustment.
So no chance of being left hypnotized forever if the therapist, I don't know, has a sudden emergency.
Absolutely zero chance. Those stories are pure drama. Hypnosis doesn't involve supernatural powers. It's not dangerous. Trance is natural. We all experience versions of it daily.
Okay, myths busted. That's good. Now, let's shift to the potential upside. The therapeutic uses. What can hypnosis actually do?
So in hypnotherapy, that focused state is used deliberately to help people change unhelpful beliefs or patterns. Therapists use positive imagery, suggestions, ways to encourage thinking differently, reacting differently to situations.
And relaxation helps with that.
Often, yes. It helps lower those barriers, makes the mind more receptive, like we said. It creates that space for new ideas to take root.
So it's about getting access to the subconscious mind to make changes there.
That's a good way to put it. Trance allows calmer access to those automatic responses, the subconscious drivers. So clients can look at them, really consider them, and decide consciously how they'd rather respond going forward.
And what sort of things is it used for? The sources list quite a few.
Yeah, really wide range. Things like fears, phobias, breaking habits, smoking is a classic one. Also managing anxiety, depression, even physical issues linked to stress like IBS, OCD, weight management, boosting confidence.
Yeah,
It's pretty broad.
that's quite the list. But one source made a really key point. It's not just the hypnosis itself, right? It's the therapist.
Oh, absolutely crucial. Hypnosis is a tool.
Yeah.
Powerful one, potentially. But it's used within therapy. Having a skilled, ethical, well-trained therapist who understands the client and knows how to guide the process, that's paramount. The tool is only as good as the person using it.
Okay, got it. So we know what it is, what it isn't, what it might do. But what does it actually look like? I mean, I still have that stage hypnosis image.
Right. Arm rigid in the air, person slumped over like a puppet.
Yeah.
In the therapy settings, usually much, much more subtle. Someone might just look very relaxed, very calm, which hopefully they'd feel anyway in a safe therapeutic space.
So no dramatic physical stuff usually.
Not necessarily, no. But there can be subtle signs. Breathing might slow down, become calmer. Muscle tone might soften. You might see their jaw relax. Maybe their mouth opens slightly.
Okay.
Sometimes you see fluttering eyelids that can be RM, rapid eye movement, like in dreaming. But also occasional swallowing, a little nose scratch, a sigh, shifting position for comfort. Those are all totally normal. Doesn't mean they're out of it.
Yeah.
Some people might even get a slight flush to their skin.
That's good to know. So it's not always about being perfectly still. And the sources say not everyone shows all these signs, or might even show the opposite, like shallow breathing getting deeper.
Exactly. The key isn't a specific checklist of signs. It's the overall impression that their internal awareness has shifted. Their focus is inward.
Right. Now, the sources mention depth of trance. Are there, like, levels?
Yeah, researchers have tried to measure this. There are scales, like the Davies-Husband scale, the Lacroix-Bordeaux scale. They try to categorize how deeply someone responds to suggestions, how susceptible they are.
Is that important for therapy? Do you need to be deeply hypnotized?
For most therapy goals, not necessarily. Those scales are maybe more for research. The general view is that most people can reach a workable level of focus, a useful depth, just through relaxation and following the therapist's guidance. The suggestions themselves help deepen that focus.
So it's different from stage hypnosis where they do those direct tests. Like, imagine your arm is heavy versus light.
Exactly. The core difference isn't always the state itself, though stage hypnotists often select very responsive people. The main difference is the purpose and the type of suggestions given. Therapy aims for internal change. Stage shows aim for entertainment.
That clarifies things nicely. Okay, so let's walk through a typical hypnotherapy process. What happens?
It usually starts with an initial consultation, maybe an hour or so. The therapist gets some background, talks about the problem, what the client hopes to achieve, and importantly, they often explain a bit about how the brain works in relation to things like anxiety or habits.
Demystifying it.
Exactly. Takes away the fear, answers questions. Then, often, the client gets a relaxation recording to listen to at home before the first actual hypnotherapy session. Builds familiarity.
And that first proper session, how long is that? What happens?
Typically around 50 to 60 minutes. The sources suggest maybe the first half, say 25 minutes, is more like focused psychotherapy, but positive psychotherapy.
What does that involve?
Things like brain revision, helping reframe negative thinking. using scaling, asking the client to rate progress, say, on a scale of 1 to 10, and that miracle question. If a miracle happened overnight and your problem was gone, what would be different? These techniques help focus on solutions and desired outcomes, keeping the more rational, planning part of the brain engaged the left prefrontal cortex.
And then comes the hypnosis part. How does that actually work to help?
This is where we talk about bypassing the conscious critical faculty, the CCF.
The CCF.
Yeah, think of it as your brain's internal editor or gatekeeper. It constantly checks new information against your existing beliefs. If something conflicts, the CCF tends to reject it. Nope, doesn't fit.
Okay.
Hypnosis, that focused state, helps to temporarily quieten that editor. It allows positive suggestions, new ways of thinking that the client wants, to be accepted more readily without being immediately shot down by old habits or beliefs.
So the therapist reinforces the positive goals.
Exactly. Gently guiding the mind towards the desired changes, away from the old limitations. But it's very collaborative. There's conscious discussion, agreement on goals, checking in on progress. The therapist reinforces the client's own desire for change. They don't impose it.
That sounds really empowering. Okay, the sources also bring up self-hypnosis. How does that fit in?
It's really key. Because, as we've said, we all drift into these focused, trance-like states naturally anyway. And since hypnosis depends on the individual's focus and willingness, you could argue that all hypnosis is essentially self-hypnosis.
Facilitated by the therapist.
Precisely. It's a partnership. But the client is doing the experiencing.
So teaching self-hypnosis is about giving people the tools to do it intentionally.
Exactly. It equips them to practice between sessions, to reinforce the changes. It might involve learning guided relaxation, using deepeners like counting down to focus attention, using positive affirmations or metaphors relevant to their goals. It gives them ownership and helps maintain momentum.
That makes total sense, giving them the skills to keep it going. And one source reminded us that trance isn't always about deep relaxation, right?
Yeah, that's an important nuance. Relaxation is often used to get there, to facilitate the focus. But the trance state itself can be highly energized. Think of a sprinter, totally focused, coiled energy right before the race starts. That's also a trance state, intense concentration.
So relaxation is a common suggestion, but not the definition of trance itself.
Correct. And it's also worth mentioning, if someone feels a bit groggy or sluggish right after a session, that's usually temporary. The positive effects tend to emerge more clearly soon after. Nothing to worry about.
Okay, great. We've covered a lot on the what and how of modern hypnosis. Now let's dive into the where did this all come from? The history seems fascinating. It's not new, is it?
Not at all. The roots go way, way back. Shamanistic practices in ancient cultures used trance states for healing all the time. The sources draw a really interesting parallel between a shaman journeying into altered states for the community and modern hypnotherapy guiding a client on an internal journey.
It seems like this need to explore altered states is just fundamentally human.
It really does seem to be. Throughout history, people have found ways through rituals, substances, intense experiences, meditation, this drive to shift our awareness, gain new perspectives, solve problems. It seems core to us. Hypnosis is just one way, perhaps a more structured way, to tap into that capacity.
So the term hypnosis is relatively new, but the practice is ancient.
Exactly. The story of modern hypnosis often starts, though, with Franz Anton Mesmer in the 18th century.
Yes, Mesmer, animal magnetism.
That was his theory. He believed in this invisible magnetic fluid connecting everything, including us. Illness, he thought, was an imbalance in this fluid, and he could cure it with magnetic passes.
Sounds a bit out there now.
Oh, definitely. And his methods were very theatrical. He had this device called a baquet, like a tub filled with magnetized water and iron rods. Very dramatic. He eventually got discredited. But the crucial thing he stumbled upon, perhaps unintentionally, was the power of suggestion. He got results, even if his theory was wrong.
So even back then, suggestion was key, even if they didn't call it that.
Right. And around the same time, there was Father Gassner, a priest doing faith healing. He induced deep trances through intense religious belief.
The power of belief itself causing the trance.
It seems so. The faith his followers had in him was immense, and apparently people went into trance very quickly. It really highlights that link between expectation, belief, and the hypnotic response.
Okay, then who came next? The Marquis de Puysegur. He was Mesmer's student.
Yes, and he's a really important figure. He started questioning the whole physical magnetism idea. He realized the cures seemed to come from the person doing the magnetizing, not a fluid. He even magnetized a tree people visited for healing.
Magnetized a tree? Seriously?
Apparently so. But his big discovery was somnambulism, that sleepwalking-like state where people could talk and respond while seeming asleep. He saw the importance of rapport, the connection between practitioner and patient. And he noticed that in this state, people could sometimes diagnose problems, and that critical filter seemed bypassed. These are foundational ideas for modern therapy. He really shifted focus towards the psychological,
So moving away from the mystical towards the mind itself.
slowly but surely, though they still held some spiritual beliefs. Then came Abi Faria, who formalized the fixation technique, staring at a point to induce trance. He stressed the subject's will and differing susceptibility levels, and he was the first to really talk about suggestion clearly during and after trance.
But like Mesmer, he faced skepticism.
Yes, publicly discredited. It's a recurring theme. John Elliotson, too. He used magnetism for painless surgery in the UK.
Painless surgery back then, that must have been revolutionary.
It was. He had real success. But the medical establishment was resistant. Some genuinely believed pain was necessary for healing. Plus, Elliotson had other beliefs, like in clairvoyance, which didn't help his case. He was discredited, too.
It's amazing how controversial it was. Then James Braid comes along and actually coins the word hypnosis.
That's right, a Scottish surgeon.
Oh.
He initially wanted to disprove mesmerism, but through experiments, he concluded it was a real phenomenon, a peculiar condition of the nervous system caused by fixed and abstracted attention. He ditched the magnetic fluid idea completely, focused on physiology, the brain.
A more scientific approach.
Definitely. He saw belief and expectation were crucial. He even realized trance could happen while awake. He tried calling it monoideism, but hypnosis, from the Greek word for sleep, stuck, even though he later realized it wasn't actually sleep. His work paved the way for medical acceptance.
And James Esdale, he did surgical hypnosis in India.
Incredible results. Hundreds of major surgeries, apparently painless, using hypnosis as the only anesthetic. He reported much lower death rates, too. But when he came back to the UK, skepticism again, though his work wasn't forgotten. Dave Ellman later named the deepest hypnotic state the Esdale state after him.
Wow. So much progress, yet so much resistance. What about the late 19th century? The French schools.
Right, you had two main camps, the Nancy School with Labo and Bernheim. They strongly argued hypnosis was all about suggestion, purely psychological, and they had a lot of success treating patients that way.
And the other camp.
That was the Salpêtre School in Paris, led by the famous neurologist Charcot. He thought hypnosis had physical roots, linked to hysteria. He even identified specific hypnogenic zones on the body.
So physical versus psychological debate.
Pretty much. But Charcot, being such a big name, brought hypnosis back into the mainstream medical discussion. He also categorized levels, lethargy, catalepsy, somnambulism.
And around this time, we get Dr. Brewer working with Anna O.
Yes, a pivotal case. Breuer used hypnosis to help her explore past experiences through regression and free association. He found that understanding the cause of a symptom could make the symptom disappear, like her issue with drinking water traced back to seeing a dog drink from a glass. This work massively influenced his colleague,
Sigmund Freud.
the very same. Freud initially used hypnosis, building on Breuer's work.
But then he famously dropped it, right? Found it monotonous.
He did. He felt his own technique wasn't great, and he came to believe the cures were often temporary. He shifted to his own method, psychoanalysis, which he saw as replacing hypnotism. And because Freud became so influential, interest in hypnosis definitely dipped for a while.
But it didn't disappear entirely. The 20th century saw a comeback, starting with Emile Coué.
Right, Coué and his focus on autosuggestion. Day by day, in every way, I am getting better and better. He believed the power lay with the patient, that imagination trumped willpower. Remember the Planck example. If you imagine falling, you probably will. His laws of suggestion are still relevant.
And then World War II gave it another boost, out of necessity.
Exactly. Doctor shortages, huge numbers of casualties. Hypnosis was used for surgery without enough anesthesia, helping soldiers deal with trauma and recover faster. Its practical value became undeniable again.
Which leads us into the modern era, Dave Ellman.
A key figure in making hypnosis respectable again in medicine. He wasn't a doctor, but he taught many physicians. Developed very efficient, rapid induction techniques like the Ellman induction, still widely used. His definition, bypassing the critical faculty, establishing selective thinking, is very influential. His book, Hypnotherapy, is a classic.
And then there's Milton Erickson. He sounds like a legend in the field.
Absolutely. Considered a father of modern hypnotherapy, hugely influential in therapy generally. A complex figure, overcame a lot of personal challenges. Polio, colorblindness, dyslexia. He developed this incredibly intuitive, indirect style. Less direct commands, more subtle suggestions, metaphors, storytelling, focused on solutions, client resources.
The African violet story.
A perfect example. Focusing on nurturing the one healthy plant, the client's strength, rather than trying to fix all the sickly ones, the problems. Very different approach. Master of brief therapy, too.
And NLP came out of studying people like Erickson.
Yes, neurolinguistic programming.
Yeah.
Grinder and Bandler developed it in the 70s. They studied people who got excellent results, therapists like Erickson, Satter, Pearls, and tried to model or break down how they did it. NLP is about programming the mind using language. Lots of overlap with hypnosis techniques, reprogramming thought patterns. Things like the rewind technique for trauma have Ericksonian roots. It's used in therapy, business, coaching.
What an incredible journey from ancient shamans to magnetic fluids to neuroscience. So, looking ahead, where do the sources see hypnosis going?
It seems to be a path of ongoing refinement. Building on that history, integrating new knowledge. Technology like EEG is actually helping to prove what's happening in the brain during hypnosis, making it less mysterious, more scientifically grounded.
So, more mainstream acceptance.
Definitely a trend towards that. It's seen increasingly as both a science and an art. The techniques matter, but so does the therapist's skill and connection with the client. There's still work to do, dispelling the old myths, the sleep thing, the mind control thing, but it's gaining ground as a legitimate, evidence-based approach, even if some corners of medicine are still catching up. This current resurgence is really interesting. Feels like we're constantly rediscovering and refining our understanding.
And our sources specifically mentioned solution-focused hypnotherapy, SFH, as a modern approach. What's the gist of that?
Yeah, SFH is presented as a really practical, effective model. It builds on that scientific tradition like braids, using trance, but it's heavily influenced by solution-focused brief therapy and positive psychology.
How does it work in practice?
Key principles include explaining the brain simply, so clients understand anxiety or depression, for example. Focusing intensely on positive changes, amplifying what's already working, even small things. The therapist takes a not-knowing stance. The client is the expert on their life. Big emphasis on resources and strengths the client already has.
So it's very forward-looking, not dwelling on the past.
Very much so. Helping the client build a detailed picture of their preferred future, using things like scaling and the miracle question we mentioned earlier, then using trance for inner rehearsal of that future, practicing feeling and behaving in those new ways. It's about taking small, concrete steps towards that desired future.
And David Newton, who developed it, his background sounds interesting. Army, business.
Right. The sources highlight how those experiences gave him great people skills. He came to hypnotherapy pragmatically, looking for what worked. Found some traditional approaches less helpful. Wanted therapy to be enjoyable. Embraced Erickson, NLP, solution-focused ideas. Learned a lot from athletes, like the boxer Glenn Catley, about the power of repetition. He founded the Clifton Practice, developed training based on neuroscience and practical skill building.
He talks about spare capacity for therapists.
Yes, that's a great concept. The idea that when a therapist is truly skilled and confident, they're not anxious or self-conscious. That frees up mental energy, spare capacity, to really observe the client objectively and respond effectively. It comes from solid, practical training that reduces the therapist's own anxiety.
Well, this has been genuinely a deep dive. Okay, as we wrap things up, what are the absolute key takeaways for our listeners?
I'd say the big ones are: hypnosis is natural. It's focused attention, not sleep, not mind control. We all do it. Used therapeutically, it's a tool to access inner resources and make positive changes, guided by a trained professional. And its history is this fascinating journey from ancient practices and mystical ideas to a modern, more scientific understanding.
And hopefully for everyone listening, we've maybe shed light on some surprising facts, shown how understanding evolves, and given you those aha moments about what hypnosis actually involves. So maybe one final thought to leave you with.
Go on.
Considering this long, winding history of exploring altered states, what other human capacities, things that seem maybe a bit mysterious now, might we be on the cusp of understanding better? Think about your own moments of intense focus, being in the zone. How might those everyday experiences connect to what we've talked about today?
That's a great question to ponder. Food for thought.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us into the really quite captivating world of hypnosis.